The strange purchase. Jake never liked being alone. Living in a city packed with people didn't change that. The towering skyscrapers, the neon lights flickering against glass windows, and the constant hum of flying cars outside his apartment were supposed to make him feel connected. But inside his small one-bedroom unit, it was just him and the silence. One night, after another long shift at his dead-end tech job, Jake sat on his couch, scrolling through random ads on his holo screen. His thumb paused over an ad that looked different. Smart pets, the future of companionship, one of a kind, limited edition. The image showed a sleek box, glowing faintly, with the promise that it would change your life. Jake chuckled. Another scam, probably. But something about the ad pulled him in. Maybe it was the way the letters seemed to move on the screen, or maybe it was the way the words echoed in his head longer than they should have. It wasn't like he had anything better to spend his credits on. A pet might actually make the apartment feel less empty. He clicked buy now, without thinking too hard. 2 days later, the box arrived. It was heavier than he expected. No labels, no branding. Just a plain metallic case with a small blinking light. But the weirdest part, the box was warm. And it wasn't the kind of warmth you get from electronics running hot. No, this felt like body heat. Jake frowned. Maybe it was some kind of advanced AI pet that mimicked real warmth to feel more alive. That had to be it. But as he dragged the box into his living room, he heard something that made him freeze in place. A soft, rhythmic breathing. His heart pounded in his chest. He crouched beside the box, pressing his ear to it. Inhale. Exhale. No way. This had to be part of the design. Some creepy feature to make the pet feel more real. But even as he tried to convince himself, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Should he open it? Jake grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't scared. Not really. Just cautious. With a slow, steady breath, he sliced through the seal. The metallic lid hissed as it lifted, releasing a strange, sweet-smelling vapor into the room. His eyes watered for a second, and when the mist cleared, he finally saw what was inside. It wasn't a pet. Curled up inside was a small girl. She looked no older than 10, her skin pale with a faint bluish tint, almost like moonlight reflecting off water. Her hair was white, but not the kind of white that comes with age. It shimmered like strands of silk dipped in light. But the most unsettling part were her eyes. They snapped open the moment the lid was fully off, glowing softly, like 2 orbs of liquid gold. Jake stumbled back, the knife slipping from his fingers and clattering to the floor. The girl sat up slowly, tilting her head as she stared at him, unblinking. She didn't look scared. She didn't even look confused. She looked like she knew him. And then, in a voice that was soft, but echoed in a way that didn't feel natural, she spoke his name. Jake. His blood ran cold. How did she know his name? He hadn't told anyone about this purchase. He hadn't even mentioned it to his coworkers or the few friends he had left. Before he could say anything, the girl climbed out of the box with a grace that was almost too perfect, too smooth. Jake backed up until his legs hit the couch, his mind racing. This wasn't possible. She couldn't be human. But if she wasn't human, what was she? The girl took a step closer, her glowing eyes never leaving his. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a chill down his spine. "You bought me," she whispered, her voice sounding like it came from everywhere in the room, not just her mouth. "Now you have to take care of me." Jake's heart thundered in his chest. This wasn't just some smart pet. This was something else, something alive. And somehow, he knew his life had just changed forever. "She's not from here." For hours, Jake sat across from her, trying to process what had just happened. The girl didn't seem bothered by the silence. She simply sat on the floor, legs crossed, watching him with those glowing golden eyes that never blinked. It felt like she was studying him, like he was the strange one in this situation. Jake's mind raced. This wasn't a prank. There was no camera crew about to burst through the door laughing. She wasn't some advanced AI toy gone wrong. No, this was something different. Something alive. Finally, he managed to find his voice. "What are you?" The girl tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "I am what you bought," she replied softly, her voice echoing faintly in the small apartment. It didn't feel like the words were just coming from her mouth. It felt like they were inside his head. "That's not an answer," Jake muttered, running a hand through his hair. He grabbed his holopad and tried to pull up his purchase history. Maybe there was some fine print he missed, some hidden terms and conditions. But when the screen blinked on, the website was gone. Not just the product listing. The entire site had vanished. No trace, no digital footprint. It was like it had never existed in the first place. He tried searching for the company name, the receipt, even the confirmation email. Nothing. It was as if his purchase had been wiped from existence. His chest tightened with anxiety. "This doesn't make any sense," he whispered to himself. "This can't be happening." The girl's eyes flicked to the holopad in his hand. And then, without her even moving, the screen flickered and died. The device powered down completely, unresponsive to his touch. Jake stared at it in disbelief. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice rising. She blinked slowly, her expression calm. "I can control your devices," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Jake's pulse quickened. This wasn't just some lost alien kid. She had powers, and they weren't normal. He stood up, pacing the room, his mind racing for a solution. Maybe he could call someone. The authorities. No, they'd probably take her away. And if they found out he was involved, who knew what would happen to him? Maybe he could get rid of her, just leave her somewhere far away. But even as the thought crossed his mind, those golden eyes followed him, calm and unblinking, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking. "I can't just keep you here," he muttered. "I don't even know what you are." The girl finally stood, moving with that same eerie grace. She walked over to the large window overlooking the city, her small figure illuminated by the neon lights outside. "You don't have a choice," she said quietly. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean I don't have a choice?" She turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "Because they are coming." The room felt colder, like the temperature had dropped suddenly. Jake swallowed hard. "Who's coming?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked over to the holoscreen mounted on his wall. Without touching it, the screen flickered to life. Static buzzed for a moment before an image formed. An empty, dark alley somewhere in the city. Jake recognized it immediately. It was just a few blocks from his apartment. Figures emerged from the shadows, tall, thin, and moving in ways that no human should move. Their bodies were shrouded in dark cloaks, but their eyes glowed the same golden color as the girl's. But these eyes weren't calm. They were hungry. "They're looking for me," she whispered. "And now that I'm here, they'll find you too." Jake's mouth went dry. He watched as the figures in the video stopped, turning their heads as if they could sense the girl watching them. One of them pointed towards the camera, and the screen instantly went black. "What the hell is going on?" Jake hissed, feeling a wave of panic rise in his chest. "Who are they? Why are they after you?" The girl's voice was quiet, but firm. "Because I escaped, and they don't like it when one of us escapes." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. This was insane. This wasn't what he signed up for. He just wanted a pet, something to make his apartment feel less lonely. But now, he was caught up in something way over his head. "I can't do this," he whispered, backing away from her. "I didn't ask for this." But the girl didn't move. She just stared at him, her eyes softening slightly. "You don't understand, Jake. If they find me, they won't just take me. They'll take you too." Before he could respond, his holopad buzzed to life, even though it had been dead moments ago. Jake picked it up, his hands trembling. An unknown number flashed on the screen. He hesitated, then answered. A cold, mechanical voice filled the room. "We know what you have. Hand her over, or face the consequences." The line went dead. Jake stared at the device, his mind racing. This was real. This was happening. And now he was in danger too. The girl's voice broke through his thoughts. "You have to decide, Jake. Help me, or they'll come for you next." Jake looked at her, his heart pounding. He didn't know what the right choice was, but deep down, he knew one thing for sure. There was no going back. The chase begins. Jake woke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. For a split second, he thought it had all been a bad dream. The strange girl, the glowing eyes, the mysterious message on his holopad. But the cold emptiness of his apartment quickly reminded him that this was real. Too real. The apartment was eerily quiet. Too quiet. He glanced around, his eyes darting to the spot where the girl had curled up the night before, right next to the window overlooking the city. But she wasn't there. Panic surged through him. He scrambled off the couch, his bare feet hitting the cold floor as he rushed to the kitchen, then the bathroom. No sign of her. He checked the front door, locked from the inside. The windows, still sealed shut. It didn't make any sense. Then he saw it. On his holoscreen, right in the center of his living room, a message glowed in bright, flickering letters. "Help me." The words pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and rhythmic, sending a chill down his spine. Jake's stomach twisted. She was gone. And she needed his help. But where had she gone? And how? Jake's mind raced. He didn't know who or what she really was. But one thing was clear. Those people, or whatever they were, had found her. And if they had her, they might be coming back for him next. He had to act fast. Grabbing his holopad, he tried to trace the message. Maybe she'd left a clue, something hidden in the data stream. But the moment he tried accessing the system, his screen glitched and died again, the same way it had when she first arrived. It was like the entire apartment was short-circuiting. Jake's eyes darted to the window. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Neon signs flickered. Flying cars zipped between the towering skyscrapers, and crowds of people moved through the streets below. But Jake knew better. Somewhere out there, they were watching, waiting. He couldn't stay here. He needed to find her. Without thinking, Jake threw on a jacket, stuffed his holopad into his pocket, and bolted out the door. The cold night air hit him like a slap to the face as he sprinted down the dimly lit hallways of his apartment complex. The elevators were too slow, too risky. He took the stairs, two at a time, his heart pounding in his ears. By the time he hit the street, his breath was ragged and sweat dripped down his back. But he didn't stop. He had no plan, no idea where to go, but he knew he couldn't just sit around and do nothing. As he moved through the crowded streets, his mind replayed the last thing she said to him. "They're coming." Jake's eyes darted to every shadow, every dark alley, every person who passed him. The city felt different now, colder, more dangerous. It was like the whole world had shifted, and he was the only one who noticed. Then he felt it. A strange sensation crawled up his spine, like he was being washed. He turned sharply, scanning the crowd. That's when he saw them. Figures in dark cloaks, moving against the flow of people like shadows against light. Their faces were hidden, but Jake could see the faint glow of their eyes beneath their hoods. The same golden glow as the girls, but sharper, more menacing. Jake's pulse quickened. They were here, and they were looking for him. Without thinking, he ducked into a side alley, his feet pounding against the wet pavement as he ran. The alley twisted and turned, narrowing with each step, but Jake didn't slow down. He could hear them behind him now, the soft, almost inhuman sound of their footsteps, light and fast, like they were gliding instead of running. He burst out onto a back street, his chest burning, his legs screaming for him to stop. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Up ahead, he saw the faint glow of a holo sign flickering above an old, abandoned factory. The place had been shut down for years, left to rot in the shadows of the city's ever-growing skyline. But something about it felt right, like a faint whisper in the back of his mind, pulling him forward. Jake didn't question it. He sprinted toward the factory, slipping through a broken side door just as the cloaked figures rounded the corner. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of rust and decay. The floor creaked under his weight as he moved deeper into the darkness, his eyes straining to adjust to the dim light filtering through the cracked windows. And then he saw her. The girl stood in the center of the room, her white hair glowing faintly in the darkness. She was surrounded by old, rusted machinery, but she didn't seem afraid. She looked calm, like she'd been waiting for him. "Jake," she said softly, her voice echoing through the empty space. "You came." Jake stumbled toward her, his breath ragged. What? What the hell is going on? Why did you leave? Who are those things?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to him, her golden eyes locking onto his. "I had to draw them out," she whispered, "but I knew you'd find me." Jake shook his head, frustration bubbling up inside him. "This isn't a game. They're out there right now, looking for us." The girl's expression softened. "I know, but we don't have much time." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the sound of footsteps echoed through the factory. The cloaked figures had found them. The girl grabbed Jake's hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "Trust me," she whispered. And before Jake could protest, the floor beneath them began to glow. A blinding light filled the room, and Jake felt the ground disappear from under his feet. The last thing he saw before everything went white was the girl's glowing eyes, staring into his, calm and unwavering. Then everything went dark. A dangerous secret. Jake awoke to the feeling of cold metal against his back. His head throbbed, a dull pounding ache that made it hard to think. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten there. The last thing he remembered was the girl's hand in his, the blinding light swallowing them whole, and the sensation of falling through nothingness. As his vision cleared, he realized they were no longer in the abandoned factory. The ceiling above him was metallic, crisscrossed with strange glowing symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air smelled sterile, like a hospital, but with a sharp electric edge that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He sat up slowly, his body aching with every movement. The girl was standing nearby, her back to him as she stared out a large, circular window. But it wasn't a window looking out onto the city. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly across the darkness, glittering like shards of glass scattered across a black velvet sky. Jake's breath caught in his throat. They weren't on Earth anymore. "What? Where are we?" Jake croaked, his voice hoarse. The girl turned to face him, her glowing eyes soft but filled with something deeper now, something like sadness. "We're safe. For now." Jake shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "Safe? From what? And where the hell are we?" She hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell him. Then she walked over and sat down beside him, her small hands resting on her knees. "We're on a ship," she said quietly. "One of mine. I had it hidden, waiting for the right time." Jake's mind spun. The ship. Hidden where? How had he not noticed? None of this made any sense. "But why me?" he demanded, frustration boiling over. "Why did you come to me? I'm just some guy who bought a stupid smart pet online. I didn't sign up for this." The girl's eyes met his, calm and unwavering. "Because you're more than just some guide, Jake. You were the only one who could help me." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "Help you? I can't even figure out what's going on. You're some kind of alien fugitive, and now I'm caught up in whatever this mess is. You should have picked someone else." But the girl shook her head. "No, Jake. You don't understand. You were the only one who could buy me. They designed it that way." Jake froze, her words sinking in like ice water. "What do you mean, designed it that way?" She sighed, her small shoulders slumping slightly. "The ad you saw, it wasn't meant for just anyone. It was targeted to you, because they knew if anyone would take me in, it would be you." Jake's stomach twisted. This wasn't just random. It wasn't some cosmic accident. He'd been chosen. "But why?" he whispered. The girl was silent for a long moment, her eyes distant, as if she were seeing something far beyond the walls of the ship. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Because I'm not just any alien, Jake. I'm their princess." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Jake stared at her, waiting for the punchline, the joke that would make all of this ridiculousness make sense. But it never came. "You're what?" She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'm the heir to the throne of a powerful empire, but I didn't want to be. My people, they're not like you. They conquer, they destroy, they enslave, and I couldn't be a part of that. So I ran." Jake's mind reeled. This was insane. A runaway alien princess. It sounded like something out of a bad sci-fi movie. But the look in her eyes told him it was the truth. "And those things that were chasing us, they're called the Kryn," she said softly. "They're my father's enforcers. They were sent to bring me back, or kill me if I refuse." Jake swallowed hard, his heart pounding. He'd thought he was just helping a scared kid, but now he realized he was in the middle of an intergalactic political nightmare. "But why involve me?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I'm nobody. What do I have to do with any of this?" The girl's eyes softened. "Because you're human, Jake. And humans, you're special." Jake blinked. "Special? We're just people." She shook her head. "Not to us. Humans are rare in the galaxy. Your resilience, your emotions, your ability to adapt, it's something my people don't understand. They fear it, but they also know how powerful it can be. That's why they targeted you." Jake felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. None of this made any sense. He was just an ordinary guy. How could he possibly be important in all of this? Before he could ask more, the ship suddenly shuddered, the lights flickering. The girl's eyes widened in alarm. "They found us." Jake's heart leaped into his throat. "What do we do?" The girl stood, her expression hardening. "We fight." Jake scrambled to his feet, panic surging through him. "Fight? Are you insane? I don't even know how to." Before he could finish, the ship rocked violently, throwing him against the wall. Alarms blared, and the metallic voice of the ship's eye echoed through the room. "Warning. Unauthorized boarding detected. Brace for impact." The girl turned to him, her glowing eyes fierce. "Jake, listen to me. You have to trust me. I can't do this alone." Jake stared at her, fear and adrenaline warring in his chest. He didn't know how he'd gotten into this mess, but one thing was clear. He was in it now, and there was no turning back. With a deep breath, he nodded. "Okay, let's do this." The girl smiled, and for the first time, Jake saw something in her eyes that gave him hope. Together, they would face whatever was coming, even if it meant going to war. The betrayal. The ship trembled beneath Jake's feet, a deep, bone-rattling vibration that sent a spike of fear straight through his chest. Alarms blared, their shrill tones bouncing off the cold metallic walls. The once quiet hum of the ship had turned into a symphony of chaos. Flashing red lights, mechanical warnings, and the distant sound of metal groaning, as if the entire vessel was about to tear apart. The girl, Aria, as she'd finally revealed her name, stood at the control panel, her slender fingers moving effortlessly across the strange alien interface. Symbols Jake couldn't understand lit up beneath her touch, shifting and spinning like pieces of a puzzle only she could solve. Despite the chaos, her face was calm, focused. Jake, on the other hand, was anything but calm. His heart raced, his palms slick with sweat. He kept glancing toward the sealed door, half expecting it to burst open at any second, revealing those cloaked figures, the Kryn, ready to drag them both into the dark. "How are they even here?" Jake shouted over the noise, gripping the edge of a console for balance as the ship lurched again. "They've tracked my energy signature," Aria replied, her voice steady despite everything. "I thought I masked it, but they must have upgraded their tech." Jake didn't know what that meant, but it didn't sound good. "Can we outrun them?" Aria shook her head. "Not in this ship. It's too old. But there's a safe zone, a place they can't follow us. We just need to make it there." "And how far is there?" Jake asked, his throat dry. Aria hesitated, just long enough for Jake's stomach to twist into knots. "Far enough that we'll need help." Help. That word echoed in Jake's head as the ship jolted violently, throwing him to the floor. The metallic walls groaned under the pressure of the Kryn's assault. It felt like they were being peeled apart from the outside, layer by layer. Then, as if on cue, a voice crackled through the ship's comm system, distorted but unmistakably human. "Jake? Jake, is that you?" Jake's eyes widened. He scrambled to his feet, rushing to the nearest comm panel. "Eli, is that you?" Eli was Jake's oldest friend, someone he hadn't seen in months. They'd drifted apart after Jake's life spiraled into loneliness, but hearing his voice now was like a lifeline in a sea of chaos. "Yeah, man, it's me." Eli's voice crackled with static, but Jake could still hear the urgency. "I've been looking for you. You're in serious trouble, Jake. But I've got a way out. Just trust me." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Eli, his best friend. If anyone could help them, it was Eli. Aria, however, wasn't convinced. She shot Jake a sharp glance, her golden eyes narrowing. "Who is that?" "It's my friend," Jake said quickly. "He can help us." Aria's eyes darkened, her voice low. "You don't know who to trust, Jake. The Kryn can manipulate minds. They could be using him." Jake shook his head. "No, Eli wouldn't do that. He's my friend." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Could Eli really have found him now, of all times? It felt too perfect, too convenient. But what choice did he have? They were out of options. Before Aria could protest, Jake pressed the comm button. "Eli, where are you?" "I'm docking at the old station near the asteroid belt," Eli replied. "I can override the Kryn's signal long enough for you to escape. But you've got to trust me, Jake. Bring the girl." Jake turned to Aria, his heart pounding. "We have to go. He can get us out of here." Aria's expression was unreadable, but after a tense moment, she nodded. "Fine. But if this is a trap..." Jake didn't let her finish. He didn't want to believe it was a trap. Eli was his friend. Friends didn't betray each other. They made their way through the ship's narrow corridors, the walls shuddering with every blast from the Kryn's weapons. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and twist around them. Aria led the way, her movements swift and precise, while Jake followed close behind, his heart hammering in his chest. When they reached the docking bay, Eli's ship was already there, a sleek, silver vessel that looked far more advanced than Aria's worn-out craft. The docking ramp extended, and standing at the top was Eli, waving them over with a broad smile. "Jake, you made it," he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous bay. Jake felt a surge of relief. This was Eli, his best friend. Everything was going to be okay. But Aria stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes narrowing. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Jake frowned, glancing at her. "What do you mean?" But before she could answer, the air around them shimmered, and Jake felt a cold chill crawl down his spine. He turned back toward Eli and froze. Eli's smile twisted into something sharp, unnatural. His eyes gleamed with a faint, golden light, the same light that glowed in the eyes of the Kryn. Jake's blood ran cold. Eli. But it wasn't Eli anymore. "You've done well, Jake," the thing wearing Eli's face said, its voice layered with something alien, something wrong. "You led her right to us." Aria's hand shot out, grabbing Jake's arm and yanking him back just as the Kryn disguised as Eli raised a sleek, black weapon. But it was too late. A sharp, searing pain tore through Jake's side as the shot hit him. He gasped, stumbling backward, his vision blurring with pain. Aria caught him before he could fall, her small hand surprisingly strong as she dragged him behind a pile of crates. "Jake," she whispered urgently, her glowing eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before. Fear. Jake's mind swam, the pain pulsing through his body like fire. He trusted Eli. He believed in him. And now he realized the truth. He'd been betrayed. "I'm sorry," he gasped, his vision dimming. Aria shook her head fiercely. "Don't you dare give up on me now, Jake. I need you." Her voice was the last thing he heard before the darkness swallowed him whole. The uprising. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, his body heavy with pain. The sharp, burning sensation from the wound in his side felt like fire licking through his veins. The world around him was a blur, flashes of light, the distant echo of voices, and the hum of something mechanical vibrating through his bones. But through the haze, one thing remained constant: Aria's voice. It was soft at first, like a whisper in the dark, pulling him back from the edge. He could feel her small hands pressing against his wound, her voice steady as she muttered words he didn't understand. Alien words, words that seemed to seep into his skin, cooling the fire in his veins, pulling him back from the brink of death. When Jake finally forced his eyes open, the world was dim and spinning. He was lying on the cold metal floor of the docking bay, hidden behind a stack of crates. The pain in his side had dulled, but it was still there, a constant reminder of how close he'd come to dying. Aria was kneeling beside him, her glowing eyes focused on his face, her expression tight with worry. "You're awake," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. Jake tried to sit up, but the pain flared, and he winced. What happened?" Aria's eyes darkened, her jaw tightening. "You were shot, but I managed to slow the bleeding. You're lucky the energy blast didn't hit your heart." Jake let out a weak, bitter laugh. "Lucky sure doesn't feel like it." Aria glanced over her shoulder toward the docking ramp, where the Kryn disguised as Eli had disappeared. The ramp was closed now, and the bay was eerily silent, but Jake knew they weren't alone. The Kryn were still here, waiting for the right moment to strike. "They used me," Jake muttered, the weight of betrayal settling heavily on his chest. "I led them right to you." Aria's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault. The Kryn are masters of deception. They'd been doing this for centuries. But we're not done yet, Jake. We can still fight back." Jake shook his head, frustration bubbling up inside him. "Fight back? Aria, I can barely stand. I don't even know how to fight." But Aria's eyes burned with determination. "You don't have to know how. You just have to want to. The Kryn aren't invincible. They rely on fear and manipulation. But humans are unpredictable. That's why they fear you." Jake stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't special. He wasn't a hero. But maybe, just maybe, he could be enough. "How?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Aria's lips curled into a small, fierce smile. "We're going to start an uprising." Before Jake could ask what she meant, she helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they moved deeper into the ship. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his side, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through it. He wasn't going to let the Kryn win. Not now. They made their way to the ship's control room, a sleek, circular space filled with holographic displays and alien symbols that pulsed with soft light. Aria moved to the central console, her fingers dancing over the controls as she pulled up a map of the surrounding area. "There's an old Kryn outpost not far from here," she explained, her eyes scanning the display. "It was abandoned years ago, but I know how to reactivate the communication array. If we can send out a distress signal, we can reach the resistance." Jake blinked, his mind struggling to keep up. "Resistance? There's a resistance?" Arya nodded. "Not everyone in the galaxy agrees with my father's rule. There are pockets of rebels, people who want to see the Kryn Empire fall. They've been waiting for a sign, Jake. And that sign is me." Jake felt a flicker of hope in his chest. Maybe they had a chance after all. "But how do we get there?" he asked. "Eli, the Kryn, they're still out there. They'll be waiting for us." Arya's smile turned sharp. "Let them wait." Before Jake could respond, the ship shuddered violently, and the lights flickered. The Kryn were making their move. "We don't have much time," Arya said, her voice steady. "But I have a plan." She led Jake to the ship's armory, a small room filled with alien weapons that pulsed with energy. She handed him a sleek, lightweight blaster, its surface cool against his palm. "I don't know how to use this," Jake admitted, staring at the weapon like it might bite him. Arya's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Point and shoot. Just don't hit me." Jake let out a nervous laugh, the tension easing slightly. But deep down, he knew this was serious. This was life or death. Arya grabbed her own weapon, a compact device that looked more like a piece of jewelry than a gun, and led the way back to the docking bay. The moment they stepped into the open, the Kryn attacked. Dark figures emerged from the shadows, their golden eyes glowing with malevolent light. They moved with eerie grace, their footsteps silent against the metal floor. But Jake didn't hesitate. He raised his blaster and fired. The first shot went wide, hitting the wall with a burst of sparks. But the second shot found its mark, hitting one of the Kryn square in the chest. The creature let out a screech, its body disintegrating into a cloud of ash. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a hero. But right now, he was all Arya had. They fought their way through the ship, side by side, their weapons flashing in the dim light. The Kryn were relentless, but so were they. Every time Jake thought he couldn't go on, Arya was there, her presence a steady anchor in the chaos. Finally, they'd reached the escape pods. Arya quickly keyed in the launch sequence, and the pod's door hissed open. She turned to Jake, her eyes fierce. "Once we're in the pod, there's no turning back," she warned. "Are you ready?" Jake nodded, his grip tightening on the blaster. "Let's end this." They climbed into the pod, and the door sealed shut behind them. The pod shuddered as it detached from the ship, and Jake felt the familiar sensation of weightlessness as they shot into space. Arya worked quickly, guiding the pod toward the abandoned Kryn outpost. The stars blurred past them, a dizzying array of light and color, but Jake's focus was on the mission ahead. They were going to start an uprising, and this time, they weren't going to lose. The final stand. The escape pod hurtled through space, a tiny speck against the endless black. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline from their escape still surging through his veins. Every second felt like a lifetime, the silence in the pod pressing down on him like a weight. Arya sat beside him, her golden eyes fixed on the star-filled void ahead, her expression unreadable. They were headed toward the abandoned Kryn outpost, a place Arya claimed was their last hope to contact the resistance. But in the back of Jake's mind, a gnawing fear remained. The Kryn weren't going to give up that easily. They'd follow. They'd find them. And when they did, there'd be no more running. The outpost loomed in the distance, a massive structure floating near the edge of an asteroid belt. Its dark, jagged silhouette was barely visible against the backdrop of stars. But Jake could see the faint glow of dormant power systems flickering within. It looked like a graveyard, a relic of a forgotten war. As the pod approached, Arya took control of the manual landing, her fingers moving swiftly over the alien controls. The pod shuddered as it pierced the outpost's weak gravitational field, the metal creaking under the strain. With a final jolt, they touched down on one of the landing platforms, the hiss of the pod's doors releasing breaking the tense silence. Jake grabbed his blaster, his body still aching from the wound in his side. The pain was a constant reminder of how close he'd come to death, but he pushed it aside. There was no room for weakness now. Arya stepped out first, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape of the outpost. The structures were crumbling, their once sleek surfaces scarred by time and battle. The air inside the station was thin, but breathable. It felt like stepping into a tomb. "We need to get to the control center," Arya said, her voice low and steady. "It's deep within the outpost. If we can reactivate the communication array, we can send out a signal to the resistance." Jake nodded, following her through the dark corridors. The walls were lined with alien symbols, their faint glow casting eerie shadows that danced along the metal surfaces. The deeper they went, the colder it became, the silence broken only by the echo of their footsteps. As they approached the control center, a sudden chill ran down Jake's spine. He stopped, his eyes narrowing as he listened. There was something else, a sound just on the edge of hearing. Whispers. Arya heard it too. She froze, her eyes darting to Jake's. "They're here," she whispered. Before Jake could react, the corridor ahead exploded in a burst of light and sound. The Kryn had found them. Figures cloaked in darkness surged from the shadows, their golden eyes burning with malice. Jake raised his blaster, firing wildly as he and Arya ducked for cover behind a crumbling wall. The blasts of energy ricocheted off the metal walls, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning circuits. "We're pinned down," Jake shouted over the noise, his heart racing. Arya didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were focused on the control center just beyond the Kryn's position. She knew what they had to do. "I'll distract them," she said finally, turning to Jake. "You get to the control room and send the signal." Jake grabbed her arm, shaking his head. "No way. I'm not leaving you." "You have to, Jake," Arya insisted, her eyes fierce. "If we don't send that signal, everything we've done will be for nothing. They'll win." Jake hesitated, his grip tightening on her arm. But deep down, he knew she was right. He couldn't let his fear get in the way of what needed to be done. "Be careful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Arya gave him a small, sad smile. "I always am." Then she was gone, darting out from their cover and drawing the Kryn's fire. Jake watched for a moment, his heart in his throat, before forcing himself to move. He sprinted down a side corridor, using the chaos to slip past the Kryn and into the control center. The room was vast, filled with ancient technology and flickering consoles. Jake didn't know what half of it did, but he didn't have time to figure it out. He moved to the central control panel, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to remember everything Arya had taught him. The Kryn's footsteps echoed closer, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he finally found the right sequence, the control panel lighting up with a surge of power. He activated the communication array, his voice shaking as he spoke into the transmitter. "This is Jake, human, with Arya, the heir to the Kryn Empire. We need help. The Kryn are here. We're out of time." For a moment, there was only silence. Then a crackling voice responded. "Signal received. Hold your position. Help is on the way." Relief flooded through Jake, but it was short-lived. The door to the control center burst open, and the Kryn flooded in. Jake raised his blaster, but he knew it was useless. There were too many of them. Just as he braced for the end, a blinding light filled the room. The Kryn froze, their golden eyes wide with shock. Arya stepped into the room, her body glowing with a brilliant, otherworldly light. "You will not take him," she said, her voice echoing with power. The Kryn shrieked, their bodies disintegrating into ash as Arya unleashed a wave of energy. Jake watched in awe, his heart pounding in his chest. When the light faded, the Kryn were gone. Aria collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion. Jake rushed to her side, pulling her into his arms. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved us." Aria looked up at him, her eyes soft. "We saved us." Moments later, the resistance forces arrived, their ships flooding the outpost with light and life. The Kryn's hold on the galaxy was broken, their empire shattered by the courage of a runaway princess and an ordinary human. As Jake stood beside Aria, watching the dawn of a new era, he realized something. He wasn't just an ordinary guy anymore. He was part of something bigger. And together, they had changed the fate of the galaxy forever.